come to talk to you today about his time in submarines, and you've heard his story, how he went off to sea, spent some time in submarines, and eventually ended up being a commander. And I think Liam brought him a medal from his grandfather, who fought in the Korean War. It was a record of service medal. And when Con came back from the war, one of the things he did was he worked on the Spirit of Adventure. He was the skipper of the Spirit of Adventure, as I think you know.
Here we are.
You might have seen.
Quite a display, isn't it? But they're really mostly campaign medals. In other words, that signifies the 39-45 war. The green one was the Atlantic Star, for having served in a corvette on convoys in the Atlantic before I went into submarines. Then I went to submarines and went out to the Mediterranean, and that's the Africa Star for the Mediterranean work. Then I went home to England, then back out again and went out to the Far East, and that's the Burma Star for the Far Eastern War. And these others are just the Defence Medal and things like that. They give medals away, you know. Can't get rid of them.
Not quite. Now, if you remember Liam's Hopper Star medal, that showed that he was in Korea. What Con was saying with those stars was it shows which area of the war you fought in. So here we go. How about this? Now, does anybody have any questions for Con, if you remember the stories?
What was it like when you were going to work the machine? Did you get really nervous?
The submarines.
Oh yes, I got nervous. I got very frightened the first time we were death jobs. And I think one gains confidence, and then eventually when I got command, I took a little First World War submarine away from the depot ship and around the locks of Scotland, and I had to dive her for the first time in command, and I was very nervous. But just pressed the traction twice as we did, and down we went, and everything went perfectly. All right? Now there's 3 here. Who's first? I can't keep up. You're first, eh?
And what was it like going down under the water, not knowing whether it was night or day?
You get used to that. My first experience of when we were training, I was learning how to work the torpedoes up in the bow end of the vessel. And I said to an old petty officer who'd been in submarines for years, I said, are we dived or on the surface? And he said, oh, I don't really know. Let's have a look at the depth gauge. We had a look at the depth gauge, and we were down at 40 feet. You don't really know that you are down there. You get used to sort of being enclosed. Is that all right? Who's next? Hannah.
Did you hate it going up that big tower when you were training?
Oh, the diving tower. A little disconcerting. There's a great big tower about 40 feet high, big 2 or 3 buildings high, shall we say, full of water, people up on the top ready to rescue if you get into trouble, but at the bottom there's a little compartment which is watertight, and they open the door and you get into that compartment. Then they shut the door, and then you open a tap thing and the compartment fills up with water, and you open the lid and you open then to the whole of the tank, and you make your way from that little compartment right to the top of the tank with this breathing apparatus Yes, I was a little concerned at first, but you get used to it, and we did quite a few dives up and down just to get the practice of it. And when you are doing that, by the way, you can't just sort of come out and go pop up to the surface. We had an apron on the front to slow down the ascent so that your body gets used to the changing pressure of water. That sound all right? You next?
Did you ever get badly hurt?
Badly hurt? No. No, I was lucky. That's one thing about submarines. You either don't come back at all, or you come back in one piece, because usually the loss of a submarine means total loss. All right? I think this one makes, won't she?
How do you feel when the submarine, when you're doing your training, the submarine that you're supposed to go and sing?
When it first died, you mean?
When the submarine, part of your training you missed or something, and you're supposed to go on the submarine and it sank.
Oh, the fetus. Well, I was lucky to get out of that one, wasn't I? Although I must say, when we did our training, it's rather nerve-wracking to be taken in and shown what the people did wrong in the submarine itself.
Grab the camera.
It was part of teaching us how to do things, but it is a bit nerve-wracking to know that something went wrong. I think you're next, young fella.
How long did it take you to get used to the diesel smell?
You don't ever get used to it. You go away for 3 or 4 weeks, which it was in the Far East, and you're breathing diesel fumes all the time. All your clothes are full of the smell, everything's full of the smell. And of course we didn't wash because we were short of water. So you can imagine we all arrived back in the depot ship being a little unclean. And we would rush into the bathrooms and fill 2 or 3 baths. You get into the first bath and then you climb out of that, get into the next one and pull the plug and eventually get into clean water. All right?
Did you ever have any time, like how long, or like with breaks, how long did you get, like for lunch and dinner and submarine?
Lunch and dinner.
Or breakfast?
Well, we did what was called watch keeping. That's 2 hours on watch doing your job, whatever it was, and then 4 hours off duty. During the off duty time you had to do your eating, sleeping, and other work. For instance, when I was navigator, I had to do navigating and so forth. Now you really do get enough time to attend to all the eating and drinking. There's no great rush. It's all fairly well organised. We used to have, we'd come to the surface at night time to charge batteries, and then we'd have dinner. Because dinner wouldn't be cooked when we would dive, we would have to cook it after we were surfaced. And then the cook would bake bread and we'd work all night, and we really turned daytime into nighttime, because at nighttime we were on the surface charging batteries. The daytime we were dived under the water. So we slept a lot that time. Who's next? Somebody, I saw a hand up over there.
Did you ever kill anyone or injure someone?
Sorry, I'm a bit deaf.
Did you ever kill anyone?
Kill anyone. That's a fairly remote sort of a business when you're in a submarine. The submarines that I was in sank ships, and people in those ships were killed. But you're very, very remote from it all in a submarine. You're down way under the water. All you know is the torpedo's been fired, and if it hits the ship and she sinks, somebody's going to get hurt. But personally, I didn't ever sort of shoot anybody. All right? It's bright eyes again.
What kind of uniform did you wear?
Well, at sea, that Incidentally, they're what you call sea boot stockings. Now, they're not bad, are they? We had to keep warm with it when we were on the surface, and we had these stockings to put in our sea boots. And when we were away on patrol, we wore these all things. That's getting a bit tacky and worn, but it's a lot of work, that one. And then when we came into harbour, we put that on. And we wore a jacket like that. With all the buttons on it. That's the jacket. They're the, you saw those medals? Well, these are the little ribbons denoting those medals you wear on your jacket. And that denotes the rank. If you ever look at a picture of a naval officer these days, you'll find that those stripes are all straight. Whereas in our sort of wartime Navy boys, we only wore these wavy stripes, so we were nicknamed the Wavy Navy. And the stripes denote the rank. All right? What's next? Come on. Is that right? That answer yours?
Will you ever attend wars in any other wars?
Mm-hmm.
Will you ever attend any more wars?
Would I ever? Well, I'm too old now. If I had to, I would. Don't worry about that. I see a line of people over here.
Did you ever shoot anybody with a gun?
Me? No. We had one occasion where we sank some landing craft, Japanese landing craft, off the Malayan coast, and there were Japanese swimming in the water. And one of my lookouts who was standing there had lost a brother and didn't like the Japanese as a result of it. And he turned around to me, he had the machine gun, he said, "Can I shoot him, sir?" I said, "No, you do not shoot people swimming in the water. If he swims to that island over there, that's good, is good luck. But no way do you shoot anybody swimming." Now, that's what depth charges. Oh, well, if you can imagine you're inside a great big tank and somebody's got a huge big hammer and they're making a tremendous whang on it, it's, or if you can imagine being under a railway bridge with a train going over it, that's when you hear the propellers of the destroyers up top. And when they drop the depth charges, I think the worst part of it really is once they've exploded, if they're not too close, you sort of get used to the idea, you're accommodating it. But the worst part is when the man on the listening devices, the hydrophones, says, "Destroyer coming in now," and you knew there was a destroyer approaching and you were just standing there waiting for him to go over the top of you and drop the depth charges. That anticipation, I think, is the worst part of it all. All right, you're next.
Did you have fun having time? Like, if you were on a ship, you started to enjoy yourself?
We had a lot of fun. In between patrols, we would go back to a base or a depot ship in a harbour and have holidays. And oh yes, we had a lot of fun over it, don't you know? In fact, even though we were away on patrol, we had a bit of fun. We used to play a game called Uckers, which is like Ludo. You ever played Ludo? Cost a little hands, I'm getting... All right? Now who's next? Oh, you've had two turns, but you've had two turns. Who you've had? Here's Snowy's turn.
When you were a commander, did you have any advantages apart from telling anyone what to do?
Did I have any advantages?
Apart from
telling them what to do.
Yeah.
Well, you are in command. You've got to tell them what to do and what not to do. Yes, you get advantages in many ways that, how can I describe it? For instance, you've got a very nice cabin in the depot ship.
Were you on land a lot or were you mainly in a submarine?
No, I was on land quite a bit. You can't be on a submarine all the time. You've got to be at home sometimes, or not at home. I was in England or Scotland or Egypt when we were out there, or Malta or Trincomalee when we were out that way. Do you know where Trincomalee is? On the east coast of the island of Ceylon. Now, who's the next one? You.
Would you like to wear your uniform?
Would I like to
Wear your uniform.
wear it?
Yeah.
Did I like wearing it? Oh yes. You got used to it, you didn't wear anything else. I had 6 years of wearing uniform. The funny experience I had when I got back from the war, I'd been delayed in England, and I got back from the war a year after it was finished. Arrived in Wellington and climbed into a tram car, still in the uniform, I don't climb still into anything else. And the tram conductor turned around to me and he said, "The war's over, why don't you get out of uniform?" So I said, "Oh, okay." Now, who was next? You had a little word at the back end.
When did you start the wars?
When?
When did you start the wars?
When did I? I can't quite hear, I'm sorry.
When did the war start?
When did the war start? The war started in September 1939 when Adolf Hitler marched into Poland and the British people said, "Oh, you can't do that, if you do, we'll fight you." And we kept on marching, so we were into war. But that's the people in Britain, and because we were allied to Britain, we supported them and fought good fight. All right? Now, who's next? We better give you another turn, you're so persistent.
What did you think when you decided that you were going to go to war?
Well, I think families had to get used to the idea that most of their sons were going to the war in one service or the other, Army, Navy, or Air Force, whatever it was. They were accepted. I don't think Mother was very happy about it, but you'd expect mothers to be like that. But the funny thing, talking of that, when I volunteered for submarines, I thought, well, this is going to upset Mum, so I won't tell her. I'll just tell her to write the letters to New Zealand House in London and they can redirect them to me. So I didn't tell Mum, but my captain wrote a letter to Mother and said how proud he was that I volunteered for submarines. Let me down. Take 11 away from 1939, I was 28 now. But I was born in 1911 and the war started in 1949. It's a long way ago, isn't it?
Your mother died in the war?
Did my mother?
Yeah.
No, my father did, but not my mother. My mother lived to write a letter. But a very trying time for mothers. She was obviously not happy about my being in submarines. And my brother was in an Australian cruiser called the Perth. It was sunk in the East Indies, and he spent 3.5 years as a prisoner of the Japanese. In fact, for the first year we thought he'd been killed. So it's tough on them. Now, I think over here we've got one. Come back to you in a minute.
How often do you have a drink of beer?
How often did I have a drink of beer? Never when we were away on patrol. We felt that it was a sacrifice that we just must keep our wits about us, so we didn't drink when we were away in enemy waters. But when we were at home in the depot ship or ashore on holiday, I drank a fair bit of beer. I think that young fella better.
When you looked up at the sky to tell where you were, how long did it take you?
Say us.
When you had to look up to the stars to see where you were, how long did it take you?
To work it out.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't very brilliant mathematically. It used to take me about an hour because I used to shoot with the sextant 5 different stars, and you've got to compute through the tables, as they call them, for each separate star and then cross them, find out where you are. And it used to take me about an hour.
What Con's saying there is that you have to do lots of sums, lots of adding and subtracting and multiplication to work it out.
I think you, one of them, you.
How did World War One start?
How did
World War One start?
World War One start? Well, I was pretty young then. Let me see. I think Germany annexed Austria at that stage. Can you remember those?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it was something to do with Serbia and Montenegro
Yeah,
in the Balkan.
No, the Balkans, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was something to do with those islands where one of the leaders got assassinated or something.
That's right, yes.
there's a band come out of Scotland at the moment called Franz Ferdinand, and there was this Archduke called Franz Ferdinand, but that was the war before Con's. When that war broke out, Con was only 5.
After war, did they just call you Con or
My mother always calls me Connell. Most of my pals call me Con. At the war, I think I mostly got Con, except when I was navigator of Proteus, they called me Vasco da Gama. Do you know who he is? He's one of the first people to go around the Cape of Good Hope in an old sailing ship. It's a long while ago. But they're just nicknames. In fact, they also had a nickname for me. The day I first joined Proteus in Alexandria, I arrived in a little tiny wardroom, and the captain said to me, I said to the first lieutenant, take off his shoes. And I thought, that's funny, what do I want to take my shoes off for? And then they turned around and the captain said, we just want to see if you've got suckers on your feet for hanging underneath the world. As far as they're concerned, New Zealand's way down underneath. And I thought I'd have to have suckers on the feet to hang on, you see. So I was often called down under, from down under. Sorry now, you haven't had a turn.
What was your favourite part of the war?
My favourite part of the war? There's no favourite part of the war, sweetheart. It was all something that had to be done. A lot of us didn't like having to do it, but it had to be done. So there's not really any favourite part. Well, you haven't heard from you before.
What is your favourite movie that you got? Which is
My favourite medal that I got. I think that one, which is the 3945 star, which proves that I went and I came back in one piece. That takes me very... Did I travel around the world? I travelled around the world, all right. I went to England first in 1940. Then backwards and forwards around the Atlantic. Then went to Egypt, and that was a long trip via West Africa because of enemy occupation. Then I went back to England Then I went to Scotland. Then I went out to Malta. Then I went back to England. Then I went out to the Far East to Trincomalee and Ceylon. And then back and then home. Took a long while, didn't it? You've been waiting a long while, haven't you? When I retired. What, from the Navy you mean? 1946, less 11, 35. So I was 6 years in the military. You're here, yes? Yes, I've forgotten that one. Have a little think, I'll come back to you.
What does a true hero mean to you? What does a true hero mean to you?
I can't quite hear, I'm sorry, I'm a bit deaf.
What does a true hero mean to you?
What do you think is a hero?
What do I?
A hero. What do you think it takes to make a hero?
I think the majority of people who go to war are heroes, but a lot of them are very unsung. You never hear about it. The ones that get publicity do something very spectacular without any thought of their own safety. Does that answer your question? It's a hard one to answer. A little snowy over there, is that me again?
In that 2 hours that you had to work, did you ever get bored?
Bored?
Yeah.
Yes. When you go away for 3 or 4 weeks in a submarine, an awful lot of the time, nothing is happening as far as the enemy is concerned. You're just patrolling backwards and forwards, hoping for targets. And sometimes you go for days and days and days, and all you're doing is 2 hours on watch, 4 hours off watch, 2 hours on watch, 4 hours off, and so it goes on hour after hour, day after day. Yes, it can get very boring. What favourite country do I like visiting?
Yeah.
Well, I'm very, very fond of England. Love England and Scotland, the British Isles. But I think over and above that, probably Egypt. Egypt's a fascinating country, to a great extent because of the history of it. Of course, it goes back for so many thousands of years. And it's a very lovely climate, right?
Here's a picture of Con in Egypt, if anybody wants to see it.
That's us in Egypt.
Which one's you?
The middle one.
Does anybody recognise this here?
Yes,
And this person here, that's Con.
Yeah. And the one on the left was Trigger, a chap called Trevor. And the one on the right was the first lieutenant, Dickie Davis. All right?
Did you picture yourself as a hero?
No. No, not me. No, I just had a job to do and I did the best of my ability. And to the best, satisfied other people that are higher up than me, that's the important thing. Now, where do we start on this road? You, I think.
Can you name the countries which were in World War II?
Name the countries that were in World War II.
It was called a World War.
It was cool, yes, it was cool. That would be a pretty major job, I think. Do you mean both sides or just the one side?
Well, was it Japanese or Chinese?
Say?
Was it Japanese or Chinese in the war?
Yes, yes. The Japanese and Chinese. The Japanese were fighting the Chinese. The Japanese were enemies, the Chinese were on our side. The Americans and the Brits and all the colonies or dominions like Canada and Australia and New Zealand It's a very big list. I think it'll take a bit of coping with that one.
Don't you like driving this evening?
What was it like driving one?
Oh, I meant driving like
Yeah,
steering.
yeah. Well, basically, except when one is coming alongside a depot ship or a wharf or something like that, when the captain takes over and does the manoeuvring of the vessel, the rest of the time in watchkeeping, each watchkeeper is in control of where the vessel is going, under the direction of the captain, of course. But there's just nothing to it. They just go along. Somebody sits there and steers a little wheel. Just like steering a yacht or anything else. All right?
Now, if you'd like a break, Con, we can. People like to see the photos from Con's submarine album?
Yes.
Okay. Right, well, I'll start.
Okay, Glenn, can you see from there?
Oh, that's me leaving Mount Eden in 1940.
And it's Con when he was 29.
29.
That's his suitcase.
Oh, that's my,
Yep. I'll just skip through the written one. Oh, what's
Port Darwin, that's interesting. That's the ship I went to England on as a deckhand. I worked in passage to England in 1940. And in 1946, when I was coming back from the war, I saw her again in Fremantle. So she survived the war. That's Port Darwin, belting across the South Pacific. There again.
So, Con, what was quite interesting about that, I'm listening now about when you said the ship survived the war, it was not just the soldiers that, you know, that there was a question mark whether they're going to survive the war, it was the ships as well.
Yes. Yes, there is quite a lot of effect on one system, I'm sure.
There was a bit of a, you can't really tell from the light here, but where I've got the indicator here, this is the waves coming over the deck on the trip out. Alright.
There's that plug again.
Oh, gosh, we got the wrong one.
What's all this?
Okay.
Oh, that's where I stayed in England when I was doing my training when I first arrived.
Oh,
That's my discharge from the merchant ship. Not very good, is it? Oh, there it is.
go to the next one.
Oh, there were 4 New Zealanders all training at the same time at a place in England when we first got there.
This is
Me on the left. On the right's the chap Alan Leonard I was sharing a room with. He bought my dad to see. Now we've only got one stripe at that stage. See the stripe there? That's what you start off with as a sub-lieutenant. Well, that's the names of all the chaps undergoing training.
So which one are you here, Con?
In the middle, there, the
This
light of him.
Oh, here. Here we go.
The chap on
Oh, sorry.
on my right there, we corresponded for many years after the war. That was the place where we did our training in Hove on the south coast of England, which is called HMS King Alfred. For some reason I've got to have a name on everything.
So what year was this?
That's 1940?
1940.
40.
Okay.
I arrived in England in August 40, and within a month I was down there doing the training. And the Battle of Britain was well underway. That's the lifeboat of a famous ship called the Trevessa. It was sunk in the Indian Ocean, and the sailors, that was the pre-war, of course, the sailors spent many weeks before they got to South Africa. Part of our training was to do a little bit of sailing in these funny little whale boats, or whalers as they call them. And there we are.
See, Con did a lot of sailing before he went away to war and when he came back, and also whenever he could while he was away at war.
That's right. Still doing it.
Yeah. There's Con here. There's some people.
Oh, that's good idea.
These are some friends during training, is that right?
Yeah, at this time when we were down at King Alfred.
Restaurant.
That's a house we visited. Lovely old English house, isn't it? Part of the beauty of England, I think, the old homes. Well, it's undergoing seamanship training. A lot of it, I might say, was very elementary for a keen yachtsman. Oh, the corvette was a great roller. That's looking down on her starboard side. You can see the davits hanging out over the water. There was a lifeboat in that davit. She swung the lifeboat into the water and smashed it up. That wasn't much good to us. That was when I was in the corvette. There's rolling from the other side. She was a great roller.
Who would like to be in that ship?
Looking down on the bow in the same rolling motion. That's the corvette officers, or aft crew, some of the crew, yes. No, there's only one officer in that. That's me on the corvette. Cold in the Atlantic.
Sorry.
Homeward bound from a convoy in the Atlantic, and we were going down the Irish Sea. And all the corvettes were named after flowers, and the one I was in was called Candy Tuft. Anybody know what that is?
So,
Candy Tuft's a good one.
can I ask a question? The whalers that you were talking about just now, that you were referring to, the whalers from those years, did you have to row it manually, or was there any?
No engine, manually or sail.
Oh, okay. What hard
That's the corvette.
So this is the ship he was sailing in the Atlantic on. Oh, have you seen this in the handout?
That's a page out of the London Illustrated News illustrating life in a corvette. That's more of it. Oh, I was in the Adelphi Hotel one night having dinner, and the Germans Air Force attacked Liverpool, that's in Liverpool, and dropped a bomb next to the Adelphi. That was a picture that was in the paper the next day, but I was in that room through the windows, and the girl I was with and myself, we were blown onto the floor, but the people near the windows there were all killed. So, lucky I wasn't in the window at that time. That's the captain of the corvette was Frank B. Collins, and that was his certificate of competence for me.
Sorry.
That's the Helford River.
Sorry.
After I qualified for commanders, for submarine service, before I went out to Egypt, I had a holiday, and that's the Helford River on the south coast of England, in Cornwall. That's one of the little Cornish fishing ports. That's the Cutty Sark, a very famous ship, sailing ship in the days of tea used to come from China in those ships.
I think I mentioned to you children that Con's brother sailed on ships like this. So,
Yeah.
and when he went round the bottom of South America, and it was very, very rough, this was the sort of ship that they were in, and men had to climb all the way up to the top of those masts to sort out the sails. So, yeah, so Con's brother sailed on those.
That's a little hotel on the Helford River. There it is again. That looks like Limerick, I think, in Ireland.
Sorry.
When we went out to Egypt, we went to Ireland first in the flying boat, and while we were waiting to go on, we had a little day, went up and had a look at Limerick. That's in the little wardroom of the submarine. Duncan on the left was lost in the submarine called the Parthian. The next chap with the red hair was, he's still alive in England. The next one on the white sweater was our captain, Philip Francis. And the one on the right was our engineer officer, Peter Scott Maxwell. He died in Australia a few years ago. And they're playing up, as you can see. Another group. That's Jeremy Nash again, who's still in England. Then me, then Peter, and then George Hunt. He lives in Australia now. He was our first lieutenant in Proteus. We're in the wardroom there. Can you see the depth gauge up on the wall there? That shows we're down at periscope depth, which is 38 feet. But George Hunt was our first lieutenant. He went on to command a submarine, and he has the record for the greatest number of hits the torpedoes fired. Because sometimes you'd fire a salvo of 6 torpedoes and you might only get 1 hit, according to how accurate or how lucky you were. But with George, everything had to be put in the right place. And he topped the whole Navy with percentage of torpedo hits.
Can you see how small it is in the submarine here? This is about half the width of the submarine, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that you're living in a very small space. And what's this here, Con?
That's the battery ventilation, because they've got batteries which are charged when you're on the surface. And when you've died, you're being propelled by battery power. But when you charge the batteries on the surface, they get up to a high voltage and start to give off hydrogen, which is very dangerous. And at that stage, they have ventilation running flat out, sucking all the air through and pumping it over the side. And that's just the ventilation intake. What have we got, darling?
Where did you sleep in the submarines?
Oh, just in a little, where we're sitting. And we didn't have enough bunks, we just sat where we were, more or less. And we did have what we call hot bunking. So when one chap got out to go on watch, you got into his bunk. It wasn't very sanitary. Oh, that's the crest of the Proteus. There we are again in the wardroom.
See how big it is, people? Would you like to live in a space that big?
And there's Limerick again. How are they on? Well, that's Captain Raw. He was our captain of the flotilla in Alexandria. Hmm? Jake. He's a flooring captain. You see, he's got straight lines. He's a real regular Navy officer. He'd been in submarines as a younger man, but he was just in charge of the whole flotilla at that stage.
Oh, we've got some cuttings
That's-
here. Here's your Jolly Roger fit people.
We used to fly the pirates' flag through St. Anything, the Jolly Roger. That's taken Alexandria Harbour with 3 submarines there, you can see.
1, 2, 3 submarines tied up alongside each other. Can you see that?
Alongside the depot ship,
Yeah.
looking down from the depot ship. There's our Jolly Roger.
But they just sank. You just sunk a few ships there, had you, Con?
We'd sunk something, I've forgotten when that. And there's only, what was that, 4 bars there? Yes, we've got more bars as time went on. What's that, Hannah?
When they took that photo, was the candle on the Jolly Roger?
Sorry,
Was the can opener on the Jolly Roger?
no, I think I'm not sure. I think perhaps on the bottom right-hand corner. That might be it. We were rammed by a destroyer one night. Because the captain couldn't do anything about it, he did his best to meet him bow to bow. And he did that very well, pretty well, but we had our hydroplanes turned out ready for diving, and so our hydroplane ripped a great hole along his side, and so the sailors put a can opener on his bag. There's a can opener there, and that was that's earlier on, before we got the can opener. Yes, Richard.
What do each of the signs mean? Like,
Yeah.
What's the what?
what do each of the signs?
The signs. Well, in that one, the top sign of a U-boat sunk by a submarine. Those bars, or each bar represents a ship sunk. The daggers represent what we used to call cloak and dagger operations, where we landed agents on the enemy shores. Then Thode surfaced one day and bombarded a airfield in North Africa, hence the aeroplane up there. The ram, what's the ram for? They must have rammed, probably rammed a kite or something in the Aegean. And then when you do a gun action, you get crossed guns, there they are. But then for each other gun action, you get a star. So you can see Thode had quite a record. The captain of that ship, that vessel, got a VC and a distinguished service sword as well. Commander Myers. After our ramming, of course our hydroplanes were badly damaged. We had to go around Port Said and the northern end of the Suez Canal and go into dock. And there we are in the floating dock. Lifted up. Well, that's on our little bridge structure on the top of the conning tower where we, that standard there is the powered periscope standard. It goes up through there. And looks like the after one just showing over here. The captain with no hat on, and the first lieutenant with the hat on, and the lookout with his knife hanging down there, all on the bridge, inward bound to Alexandria, returning from a patrol. I went up to Egypt, to Cairo for a holiday, and met 2 friends. The one on the right is Lawrence Nathan. You've probably heard of the firm in Auckland called L.D. Nathan's. Well, he was the son of that firm. And on the left's a chap called Dick Scobie, who came back from the war and taught anthropology. He was very interested in the Egyptians.
There's Con there.
Me in the middle. Well, that's our damaged propeller. See, you can't see very well, but the ends of the blades are all knocked off. That's looking at the pressure hull and the saddle pads bulging out on the side. That's underneath the submarine. That's a submarine diving. That actually is Thunderbolt, which was the new name given to Thetis. Thetis was sunk before the war accidentally in Liverpool Bay, the loss of 90-odd lives, but she was salvaged and rebuilt and christened Thunderbolt. That's for diving. You can see all the main dim tanks are open and the water's flooding up into the ballast tanks. Proteus returning from Poolside. To try and reduce our silhouette, we cut the little piece off the back of the bridge structure. See how we've rounded it off?
This is the submarine that Con spent most of his time in the Mediterranean.
That's looking underneath it, looking up at the bow tubes.
Is this where the torpedoes come out
That's
of?
where they come out, but the bow doors are shut, you see. That bow door has to open for the torpedoes to come out.
Should we go to further forward to your time in the
Well,
South
if you
Pacific?
like, you know the plot better than I do.
There you go.
Down in Calcutta.
Oh, mention the dispatches. Who's this? C.P. Thode. This means that he'd done a very good job. So the Navy wrote a letter home and said, Con's done a very good job.
Spoke to my mum.
Yeah.
But you probably saw at the bottom, so that General J.A. Thode and brother was at that stage presumed lost.
Yeah.
So we explained that he survived. We'll get that later. When I went back to England after Proteus, I went back in the Tor Bay, that famous submarine, and there were two New Zealand boys aboard as stokers. The left-hand one was Wiggy Bennett, all Bennetts are Wiggy in the Navy, and the right-hand one was Philip LeGros, and all the people with names like that finished up being called Froggy. So he was Froggy LeGros. And that's taken, 3 New Zealand were taken, that photo was taken behind St Paul's Cathedral in amongst the wrecked buildings. That's the Proteus
Is the
Jolly
tin?
Roger with the cross tin openers there, you know. There they are. There we are, some tin openers in Italian destroyer.
So this is the story in the newspaper on the 11th of November 1942, which tells the story of how Proteus earned her tin openers. There's the tin openers there on her Jolly Roger. Con was on board when they came up there and they opened up the side of a ship as if it was a can opener or a tin opener. So that's why they got tin openers on their Jolly Roger.
Maybe she can ask some more questions with it.
Would anybody like to ask some more questions while I just...
Oh, I've got 3 over here, look at it.
Oh, there you go.
Where do we start? Forgotten, have you?
When I asked if he had shown you
you said,
Sorry. Okay.
when you said no, and you talked about that guy who wanted to shoot the Japanese people, and you said he couldn't. How come? You don't feel like a person in the world.
Well, I don't think it's cricket, shall we say, to shoot people in the water. To me, it's just, you've got to take your share of people getting killed during a war, but that to me is deliberate murder, and I think it's wrong. Just my idea of it. Have you forgotten again?
Did I ever see it?
No. I don't know what it means. I did a yacht race to Suva when in 1966. And there were only, out of the 6 of us on board, there were only 2 of us that weren't seasick, all the rest were seasick.
Oh, did you at war any time, did you have any event with like hurricanes, tornadoes?
Well, I don't know about tornadoes. We had some shocking weather in the Atlantic. But whether you'd call them hurricanes or not, I don't know. Just a full gale, I think, or very big storms. Yes, I saw a fair bit of salt water in Juba. In fact, we were coming back from the North Cape of Norway, from Altor when I was in her, and we had to be tied to the bridge when we were on the surface, charging back, because otherwise we got washed off. So it was rough. Oh, you remember?
What was your mum's name?
My mum's name. My mother was Ivy Scott, but she became Ivy Thode when she married my father. Winifred Ivy she was, and everybody called her Ivy. She was a darling. Now, you again?
Did any of your family go in the war?
In the family. Well, my brother went. He was in the Aussie cruiser, Perth, which I think. But he got back in the end. All right. And a cousin. I had a cousin in the army who was killed in casino battle. Who else? That's about all I can think of. You, yes.
Do you know how many ships and submarines you went in?
How many submarines I went in?
Yeah, ships.
Oh, let me see. Tribune for training, Proteus, Torbay, H-28, H-50, Altor, Tuna, Scepter, City. 9. I saw a few of them, didn't I?
Did you have a strong stomach?
Did I?
A strong stomach.
Have a what? I can't hear. I'm sorry, I'm dead.
Like, so when you go to different countries, they have different types of food.
I got 5 minutes of paper. So.
Yeah.
Got 5 minutes of paper.
Disgusting.
When you're in a different country.
If I was starving. I don't know. I think I'd be very careful about what it might do to my company.
That would be great.
I think you've got to be fairly selective, although if you're starving, you may have to be at last resort, mightn't you? All right. Sorry, I couldn't help you on that one. Where are we now? Yes. There he is again.
Did you always carry your suitcase in that bag?
No. Well, that's one of the things I got as the war went on. Carrying stuff around, then I had an ordinary, the Navy had their own green canvas-covered suitcases, proper suitcases. Because we did sometimes have to carry some good gear, you see, and you can't bundle it up in a kit bag. kit bag mainly was used for seagoing gear, oilskins and so on. All right? Yes.
Did your site ever accidentally bomb you?
Did our site accidentally bomb it?
Yeah.
Sure did. We were doing exercises west of Scapa Flow, and an airplane came in and dropped 4 depth charges on us. And actually, if you can imagine, we're going on like that. He spread them. He came across the angle wise like that, and there were 2 on the port quarter and 2 on the starboard bow. And the submarine was badly bent, so you had to go back to dockyard. So you can't trust your own forces. There's a famous story of a submarine early in the war returning from patrol, and she was a bit late, so they sent him a signal. Said, please advise when you expect to get in. And he sent a signal back, said, expect to get in tomorrow, providing the RAF stops bombing us. The RAF being our own forces. Sorry, go on. Greedy, do you remember? You forgot the name.
Did you ever get scared
Get scared?
Yeah.
Sure did, darling. I got scared all right. Yes, I think the first time I experienced depth charging, I found after the attack that I was shivering, and I thought, it's funny, why am I shivering? It's quite warm. And then I thought, I know why you're shivering, you're scared. So that's why I then went and got that thing and put it on. And I always wear all that when we're doing a submarine attack, and so I could cuddle into the wall for comfort. Now, anybody else at the moment? Oh, look at. Yes, yes.
How many people were on the submarine?
How many people? In the H class we had about 25. Yes, plane dropped bombs on us in England. No, we had we had air raid alerts in Egypt, but they didn't ever drop anything on us. And of course we had them dropped on us at sea. Everybody gets angry at sea.
Now, would you children like to see the submarine that Con was the commander of, and he brought it down into the South Pacific? Now, we didn't actually get to tell that part of the story, but this is the submarine here that Con helped to. He named it, and he was in charge while it was being built. And then once it was built, he brought it down into the South Pacific because at that point they'd beaten the Germans. Is that right, Con?
Oh, not initially.
Oh, okay. But you came down here to fight the
No, well,
Japanese.
the need for submarines diminished once people were invading Europe because they wanted us out of the road, you see.
Right.
And that's when we were sent south to Far East.
Right. Now, would you like to tell them the story about hunting that Japanese destroyer where you knew where it was going through, but you were sent somewhere else?
Ah, hang on then, all right. No, when the British forces decided to retake Burma from the Japanese, a big naval force was gathered together in Ceylon, Trincomalee, to go to Burma, but they realised that the Japanese still had a heavy cruiser and a destroyer in Singapore which might attack the force. Although outnumbered, she could have caused unnecessary damage. So they put 3 submarines, and we were one of the 3, down in the very narrow part of the Malacca Straits between Sumatra and Malaya. Sure enough, this big Jap cruiser, the Haguro, came out and was somewhere in the middle place, middle route, something called a supple, she fired 6 torpedoes and they all missed. But after she'd got out, the submarine surfaced and sent a signal in code, of course, indicating that she was out on the loose. The Japs apparently decided that their position was compromised because although they couldn't decode the signal, they could hear it had been transmitted. So they turned around and went back in, and they went back in the same hole that the submarine was in. She fired another 6 and missed. The captain wasn't mad over that, but anyhow, the people back in Tripoli then said, well, that's funny, why would Haidura go back through the same hole when she knew there was a submarine there? So I was in a hole on the west side of the Aroa Islands, and another submarine was over on the Penang side, so they pulled them all out, and the 3 of us were all put in the middle hole, expecting to come out again through that same place. He came out again, and he came out through the hole where I did. So I missed my chance to fire a torpedo. That explain that? That's a bit unwieldy, was it?
No, that's good. Now there's just one more question, and then I think Kayla's got something. Yes?
What was your favourite submarine you've been in?
Favourite submarine? Well, I think Proteus, although I was the navigator and not the not in command, we had a tremendous record of sinking ships and a great team aboard. A lot of the crew were people who'd been in the Navy pre-war, very experienced submariners. As the war went on, the crews were very, very diluted with young people coming in with very little experience. But I think my favourite submarine would have been Proteus. All right? What's going on? Anna?
We'd like to thank you for coming and talking with us.
Ooh, look at this. We got all the signatures in here. They're lovely. Children, thank you so much. Should I say children, young people? That's wonderful, isn't it? A big thank you. I'm so proud of it. Thank you very, very much, all of you.
Would you like to give them a clap?
And what's this?
And fly-by-day.
That looks very interesting. Thank you all very, very much. It's wonderful talking to you. Keep up the good work. Keep up learning. That's important. All right?
Another clap for Con, children. Con, on behalf of Room 23, we would very much like to thank you. I'm sure we're going to talk long after you've left here. We're still going to discuss what we've heard here today and also what Sandra has shared with us. So I'm sure, like I said, you know, it's good to hear, to get first-hand information, and I'm sure they've got plenty to share maybe with other people that wants to hear about the Second World War and that. So thank you very much.
I've been quite happy. I might say that Sandra did all the hard work.
And once again to you also, Sandra, thanks very much, and to your son who came along.
Simply hope to know.
Sorry, no one that. Sorry, no one that.
No.
Like the boat.
girls, boys.
Or any sort of ship.